What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about this video by TLDR News EU. And this video I want to check out is called Why Trump Could Actually Be Great for Europe's Economy. So, I have to admit, as an American, at this point, I'm just absolutely bewildered by all this going on. I am flabbergasted. My gasts are flabbered. They're beyond flabbered at this point, whatever that means. It's almost kind of funny in a weird, twisted kind of way. Trump promised us, the citizens of the United States, that all of these tariffs would be very good for America, although a lot of Americans never even believed that. But that was the promise. And now that it's actually happening, all of our US markets are crashing. A US recession is basically all but guaranteed at this point, and apparently Europe, who you could say we're trying to screw over, could be totally fine. You could come out better at the end of this, It's just all so backwards, so incredibly backwards from what Donald Trump thought he was accomplishing. So today, I do want to take a look at this video explaining a lot of this stuff about how all these U.S. policy decisions and tariffs have been quite bad for the United States so far and could actually be good for Europe's economy. We just placed the promise for a 20% tariff on the EU. That's going to take effect soon. Before we start the video, I want to do a brief shout out, maybe even a moment of silence for the Heard and McDonald Islands, which have become the target of a 10% tariff. This is an island that is uninhabited except for penguins. So somehow this ended up on the list. Just shows, the amazing work we're doing here in America. We are targeting this penguin island. Hopefully the penguin representative can, reach out to the United States and maybe negotiate with Donald Trump soon. I wish all the best to them. But let's get started here.
Europe exports a lot of stuff to the US, and Trump's 20% tariff will mean less demand for these goods. And it's not even like any other country can really replace the US in this respect.
Sure.
American consumers just buy more stuff than basically anyone else.
Right.
And the uncertainty created by Trump's trade wars will probably dampen consumer demand elsewhere too.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people, when the idea of tariffs were first announced, the first reaction from a lot of people around the world is like, well, you idiots, tariffs hurt the country that is imposing them because it's going to raise prices here in the United States. We are trying to avoid a recession here in America, and it felt like we had almost done that, and now, the way you don't avoid a recession is doing exactly what we're doing. This is the exact opposite of what you want to do. We are taking money away from U.S. companies because U.S. companies that are importing goods from around the world have to pay these tariffs to the government now, or they're going to pass off that extra cost to American consumers. So we're going to have less money, and all of this is just going to increase inflation in the U.S. and definitely, from what I've heard from economists, is definitely going to trigger a recession that we've desperately been trying to avoid. This is exactly what you don't want to do. So it's really quite bewildering.
Trump's trade wars will also exacerbate anxieties about Europe's deindustrialization, given that a large fraction of these exports are industry adjacent, and that Trump's 54% tariff on China risks inviting a flood of Chinese exports, as Chinese businesses are now effectively unable to sell to the US market.
That's unbelievable. Like, I know the relationship between the US and China is complicated at this point, but no one can deny that the United States relies heavily on Chinese imports into our country. So many businesses here in the United States literally just buy stuff from China and sell it inside of the United States. And all of those businesses are going to go out of business. You can't just absorb the costs of a 54% tariff. If you're a company that depends on Chinese imports, you're going to go bankrupt. Like, and that is so many American companies. Yeah, the whole China thing. 54%, my God. Anyway, putting that aside, now China is going to be incentivized to just increase their trade with Europe. You know, the premise of some of this is that it is true that Europe is losing something in the sense that Americans buy a lot of stuff from Europe, and now that is going to decrease. But it seems like there's a whole lot of other things going on that are going to negate any negative effects that decreased trade from Europe to America. Like, that's going to hurt us, but it sounds like Europe, it has a lot of other good things going for it, though.
Directing their goods to Europe instead, pushing down prices further and putting more strain on their European competitors. However, in the medium to long term, there are reasons to think that Trump could actually be, well, really quite good for the European economy.
Wow.
For at least 5 reasons. The first is that the uncertainty that Trump has created in the US has made America way less investable, and at least some of this money that would have been invested in the US will now shift into the EU.
Which is hilarious, because from what I've heard from Donald Trump, one of the whole ideas here was how this was going to make investing in the United States so attractive. Not really. It was more like trying to twist companies' arms into relocating into the United States so that you have companies and manufacturing here in the US. That was one of the thoughts that would happen and stimulate our economy, but it just turns out it's very, very hard for companies around the world to just relocate their business or create an entire factory or manufacturing plant in the United States. That is not something that happens quickly. If that's our strategy here, that can take years. Like, it could take 10 years. And by then, what company would even want to do that, really? Because of just not wanting to do business with America in principle, but also, by the time businesses relocate to America, even if they did do that, by the time they actually built the infrastructure here in America, we might have a whole new administration with a whole new president that eliminates all these tariffs and opens up free trade again. And then what was the point of relocating here if all of this ends in 4 years? So I think a lot of companies are looking at it that way, where it's like, I think we're just gonna pretend America doesn't exist for 4 years. That's in practical application, that's what happens.
This is largely why, since January, European stocks have massively outperformed American stocks, as investors shift their cash from the US into the EU.
Wow.
The Stoxx 600, an index covering 600 European companies, is currently slightly up in this period.
Wow. This is cool, because I never look at like European stocks or stock market, or I've never seen any of this stuff.
Well, the S&P 500, another index covering the 500 biggest American companies, is down an astonishing 8%. Its worst quarter since the pandemic. This is a marked reversal of a long-running trend, because since really 2009, European stocks have generally underperformed US ones. Another reason that investors might move their money from the US to the EU is the erosion of the rule of law that we've seen under Trump. As well as Trump's rhetorical assault on the judiciary, there have also been some glaring cases of blatant corruption. For instance, crypto entrepreneur Justin Sun was being investigated by the SEC until he bought $75 million of crypto tokens from World Liberty Financial, a crypto venture associated with Trump. And then, well, the SEC suddenly dropped the suit. Now, fretting about rule of law might seem like a soppy liberal indulgence.
And recently, Trump pardoned a different crypto criminal who scammed people out of like millions and billions of dollars. I forget his name, but Trump literally pardoned him, which left a lot of people really upset, myself included, because that, and then dropping the investigation against this guy just because these people clearly have paid off the right people and Trump satellite companies or whatever the case. It's like there's no excuse for pardoning literal criminals that have stolen millions of dollars from American citizens like that. It's very bad.
But upholding the rule of law is actually just good for the economy. And that's because investors will only invest if they know that contracts will be enforced and disputes litigated in good faith. Anyway, the second reason is human capital. In short, America is becoming a less attractive place to live and work, and Europe can benefit from this by attracting smart people who would otherwise go to the US and drive up US economic growth.
I literally did a video recently about how a lot of European countries are issuing travel advisories, warnings not to visit the United States. And that's going to extend into don't work in the US, don't live in the US. And just, in general, just hearing how, like, awful of a sentiment that is for us Americans to hear, in practical, application, that means a lot of smart people aren't coming and working in the US as well.
The number of Americans moving to Europe was already on the rise before Trump, as was the number of Americans saying they wanted to leave the US, with Gallup polling from the last year finding that a record 21% of Americans wanted to permanently relocate to another country.
Wow.
But it's not just about Americans moving to Europe. It's also about non-Europeans and non-Americans looking to immigrate. Again, America is already becoming a less attractive place for international immigrants, and this trend will presumably accelerate under Trump.
Wow.
And this is especially true for students. For decades, America has been one of the most desirable places to study, but Trump's assault on American universities, which he sees as bastions of the liberal establishment, will presumably make it less attractive for international students. After all, who would want to go to an American uni when there's a chance that you could be arbitrarily detained or deported because of something you've posted on social media?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally get this. What, in one word, like unpredictable. Like, who wants to deal with something that is just completely unpredictable? If you're going to be allowed to stay, like what kind of experience you're going to have, if you're going to be deported, what kind of laws are going to change, what kind of policies are going to be put into effect in the next 4 years. Who can possibly know at this point? And with that level of uncertainty, absolutely that's going to decrease the demand for people to immigrate to the US.
Or even just because you come from a so-called unfriendly country. These students will probably instead opt for unis in the EU or UK, giving Europe an upper hand in terms of human capital.
Right.
Anyway, the third reason that Trump could be good for the EU is that it might actually help Europe to reindustrialize. Trump's tariffs are nominally about bringing manufacturing and industry back to the US.
Yeah.
Because in theory, tariffs will force companies who want to sell in the US market to set up factories and manufacturing centers in America.
That's the idea. I think that So will not happen.
However, because they've been designed so poorly, they'll probably have the reverse effect. Trump's universal 10% tariff, for instance, will make all components more expensive, which will ultimately reduce the competitiveness of American manufacturers. If Trump wanted to, say, rejuvenate America's auto industry, he should have just tariffed cars, not everything, including car parts, because that actually puts American car makers at a disadvantage too. More generally,
It's bewildering. I'm going to keep using that word because it's so appropriate. I don't think I've heard one credible person in the US on the news or social media, no one actually come out and honestly try to defend this policy decision for these global tariffs. Like, I'm not seeing anyone like substantial, who knows what they're talking about, Republican or Democrat, come out and be like, this is a really good idea. I think a lot of people who don't really know what they're talking about or don't have any stake in this or don't really care about what happens or a lot of people just be like, yeah, this sounds good. Like, or I don't even know what's happening. And it's just like, okay, stop. Just, all right, go over there.
building out factories takes years of steady investment, which is unlikely to happen given the uncertainty surrounding Trump's trade policy.
Of course.
Plus, the risk that it could all just be undone by his successor. Industrial companies
Yeah.
looking to build new factories in a predictable business environment might well turn to the EU instead, especially given that the EU is in the process of developing a more active industrial policy.
Okay.
The fourth reason that Trump could ultimately be good for Europe is that he could force European policymakers to boost domestic demand.
Okay.
As evidenced by Europe's reoccurring trade surpluses, the EU has long relied on exports to fuel its economy.
Sure.
This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does leave you vulnerable to external trade shocks, and
Right.
is one of the big reasons that the EU economy has struggled so much over the past few years.
Just a side note, it's like no matter what happens because of these tariffs, the relationship between the United States and a lot of countries around the world, just on a personal level, just relationships. We're not even talking about like economics or finance. It's just like the relationship between the US and a lot of countries has been just ruined, dragged into the mud. The good faith is gone. Nobody seems to trust us anymore, and let alone want to like invest in us or 'cause that matters. Like, and again, I'm not talking about finance here, although that's bad. I'm just talking about attitude, the attitude towards America from around the world. From what I can tell, is just like, screw America, screw them. Like, forget them. We can get on without them. And that, you can't even measure, you can't even quantify how bad that is for the United States.
Well, the best performing European economies have almost all been those with relatively strong domestic demand. The sudden withdrawal of the American market could, in the long term, help Europe to rebalance its economy towards domestic demand rather than exports,
Oh, wow.
which could make it more resilient going forwards. The fifth
Yeah, because given all these tariffs and the trade wars, I think there's a lot of countries that don't want to be so reliant on us, America. You don't want to be so reliant on us and trade from us. You want to be more self-sustaining or do business with other countries around the world. Because again, it goes back to that unpredictability. It's like, why would you want to like be so reliant on a country where you have literally no idea what they're going to do or say the next day?
The reason is a little speculative, but there's at least a good chance that the euro could go some way to replacing the dollar as the world's reserve currency.
What?
i.e., the currency that central banks and other big financial institutions like to hold in their foreign exchange reserves.
This! I had not heard about this. The one thing America has going for it is like we have a huge economy, a lot of great businesses, and the US dollar is so strong and such an important part of the world economy. And that is basically one of the reasons why the US economy is so resilient. And maybe why a lot of people aren't in complete panic. But if the US dollar was replaced as like the sort of the world currency of business, if it was replaced with the euro, forget it. Like, America could be actually toast if that happened.
We've done a whole video on this recently, but the TLDR is that Trump's unorthodox economic policy risks undermining the dollar's reserve status.
Yeah.
And the fact that the dollar has declined at the same time as American stocks suggests that this process is already underway. That's because in the past, the dollar has normally strengthened during times of uncertainty, because investors used to see it as a safe asset, which is why they liked holding it in their reserves. If the euro were to replace the dollar in this respect, it would both strengthen the euro, helping to boost imports and domestic demand, and potentially allow European countries to borrow at lower rates, in the same way that the US gets to. So there you have it. While Trump's far-reaching tariffs and wider policies will cause some pain for Europe, they also present the continent with some pretty considerable economic opportunities.
Okay. This was a very good video, by the way. This is again by TLDR News EU. They're awesome. They come out with these videos so quickly and make such great presentations about ideas that like are really current, already talking about this stuff, and I can't give enough credit to this channel. So anyway, this was really eye-opening. I think every American should have to watch stuff like this and really understand what's happening. Because I think a lot of Americans are waking up to how bad this situation is, especially like after the global tariffs were announced, that really, and our markets crashed. Turns out when Americans lose a lot of money, they finally start caring about stuff. So yeah, and this video just kind of educated me on, you know, I think an outlook a lot of people have is the entire world is suffering because of this. And it's like, no, actually, could mostly just be America, actually. The rest of the world might be fine. America is just like one small part of the, globe. So you guys could all just like band together and get on without us. And that kind of seems to be what's happening. And yeah, that's a scary thought as an American, although it makes complete sense given what's happened. So anyway, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to give this a like or leave a comment with your thoughts on the US global tariffs and how this is going to affect Europe and the rest of the world, or just your thoughts in general about what's going on. That'd be really cool to hear about, especially from a European point of view. And if you're interested in more videos like this, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.